Good morning, church family. My name is David Norton, and I'm the student pastor at our Madison campus. And I'm so glad to be walking through our daily Devo, our deep dive daily Devo this morning as we continue through the book of Acts. This morning's passage is a short 5-verse passage, but I believe it has an awesome lesson. And what's cool is taking these small passages, it allows us to dive deeper into passages we may normally overlook and miss and really see what it is we can learn from that scripture, because we know all scripture is good for teaching. So I'm going to read our short passage and we'll get into talking about it. So our passage is Acts 14 verses 6 through 10. They learned of it and fled to Lystra and Derbe, cities of Lycaonia, and to the surrounding country. And there they continued to preach the gospel. Now at Lystra there was a man sitting who could not use his feet. He was crippled from birth and had never walked. He listened to Paul speaking, and Paul looked intently at him, and seeing that he had faith to be made well, said in a loud voice, "Stand upright on your feet." And he sprang and began walking. So if you notice, verse 6 kind of leaves, it's like a half sentence, right? Knowing what? So we have to look back at yesterday. Yesterday we saw that Paul and Barnabas were teaching in Iconium, and Jews and Gentiles alike began to hear and begin to accept the gospel, but there was also a contingent of Jews that were against the gospel, and they raised up some Gentiles to join them, and eventually an insurrection rose up to where it got so violent that they were threatening to stone Paul and Barnabas, so Paul and Barnabas left. So that's what verse 6 is referring to. When they learned of it, they fled to Lystra and Derbe. And what I think is important to see here is, once again, this is a trend we see throughout Acts, is as Paul and Barnabas teaches, other believers teach the gospel, they encounter various trials. They encounter various obstacles, and constantly they see immense fruit for the gospel, but they also see it met with opposition, and they see their lives constantly in danger. But what's so cool is, even though they're fleeing Iconium and they're running away to go somewhere else, and they're still going for the gospel. Even though they taught the gospel, and that's the very thing that's putting their lives in danger, they're going to the very next city and they're saying, we're gonna spread the gospel again. And if it ends the same way, so be it. It's all worth it if some people are hearing the gospel. If some people are accepting it, if people are hearing it, it is all worth it, no matter the cost. And so that is a cool transition as we see them leaving one ministry to another, not necessarily leaving it the way they want to. They're not leaving it positively necessarily. They're leaving it running away from violence, but what they know is the gospel is heard and someone accepted it, and we're going to go tell it here now. So that brings us to this ministry in Lystra, and that brings us to verses 8, 9, and 10, which honestly can be verses that are easily overlooked. And like, what's the point? And if you even look at the language of verses 8, 9, and 10, it's stated real nonchalantly. Even when like Paul heals the lame man in verse 10, says, "Stand up right on your feet. Just get up and walk." I think this is a passage we can easily overlook, and I think what is cool is we see this lame man could have been a man that was easily overlooked. They're just now coming to Lystra and Derbe, and the first detail listed about their ministry there was this lame man that was lame from birth, that never walked, that has probably been constantly overlooked, constantly seen as a burden, as someone people didn't want to deal with. This man that was constantly overlooked was the very person that Paul said, that man, he's listening. It says that Paul saw that the man was intently listening to the gospel that Paul was preaching. And Paul said, man, this man has faith, and he is someone I'm not going to overlook. He saw that the man had an ear to hear. Thus Paul said, he has the faith to be healed. Stand up and walk. What's so cool about this is Paul was sharing the gospel, but he was also sharing it in a way where he did not overlook the people that may often be considered lesser or may not always be seen. It reinforces the idea that the gospel is for everyone. And I think the takeaway from us that we can learn from Paul and Barnabas in this story is, one, continue to spread the gospel. When you're met with obstacles, when you're met with opposition, and it doesn't always work out the way you want it, know that the success is sharing the gospel and keep on sharing it. Never lose hope in sharing the gospel. Never lose faith in sharing the gospel. Always remember what the gospel means to your heart and what it's done for you, and never cease in sharing it. And then 2, don't ever count anybody out for the gospel, and don't miss those divine appointments. Don't overlook the people God has put in your path for you to share the gospel to, because it's not always going to be the ones that you see immediately, and it's not going to always be the ones you expect. Paul saw this lame man who never walked in his life, and he saw that that man was listening and said, he's listening to this gospel. He has the faith to be healed. So church family, let's never cease in sharing the gospel, and let's always pray that we have hearts that are sensitive to where God is leading us to share the gospel, and eyes that are seeing the people he's placed in our path, not overlooking anybody, because the gospel is a message of love for all. Thank you, church family. Have a great morning.